Hello, I'm Dr. Roger Lucas. I'm a pediatric dentist, and I've been practicing for the last 17 years. I own two practices north of Seattle, and I'm the author of More Chocolate, No Cavities. And I wanted to share with you my most popular lecture that I've given over the last 8 years, as I find it very complementary to the lectures we've heard this weekend in AAPD. Now, I thought, why do I have to wait and share this and try to speak in front of the group when I can share this right now and you can watch or listen to it, whatever you'd like. So without further ado, let's talk about practical prevention. Let's get real with parents. And it's a bonus chocolate. Now, when I sit through a lecture, I realize I don't agree with some of the things they say, sometimes a lot. And I'll sit there and go, that doesn't apply to me. They don't know my office. So I get it. Some things may not apply to you, some things will. But if I find I sit through continuing education and I have one golden nugget, I give them a 5-star review and I say thank you, because it takes a lot of work to put this together, and I know I can learn something from every lecture that I see. So if it doesn't apply to you, that's great. If you don't agree with everything, that's great too. But I want to try to help you as best I can and help you avoid a lot of the frustration that I have been through when I was younger, a pediatric dentist. A few other things. Dr. John Medina is a neuroscientist at University of Washington. I learned from him that the human brain can process listening faster than the normal human voice speaks. So sometimes I'll speak fast. Now, this is recorded, so you can always go back if you miss something, but I like to speak quickly. Also, great speakers today, lots of great speakers. I can't name them all, but I want to do a special shout out to Dr. Brian Novi. There is some inspiration over the last 8 years in this lecture from him of learning how to help motivate patients and what they can say yes to. And Dr. McLean, just so helpful with minimally invasive dentistry, smart fillings, Hall technique. So I just want to give a shout out to the both of you and thank you for the great lectures this weekend. And if you get a chance to hear them or you missed it somehow, I would definitely watch those lectures. Now, everything I do is my own opinion. I don't have any financial disclosures other than being a book author and owning 2 pediatric dental practices. None of this is sponsored by the AAPD, which means I can say whatever I want, which is awesome. So yes, but I just feel like I need to share this because caries is a difficult disease, and we don't have to do this on our own. Why did I start even thinking about this or doing this? Well, because of that girl right there. This was taken about 14 years ago when my first daughter was born, and I would sometimes get referrals from general dentists across the street, and they'd have some cavities on E&F, and they'd go, I don't know where it came from. It's caries risk. I don't know. We don't know where they came from. And then I didn't like the fact that, well, we'd just take bite wings at age 5 and, oh, sorry, you have 8 cavities. I'm sorry, I don't know how to help you. And I just kept blaming that. And I thought, how do I stop this disease for my girl, for my daughter? I wanted a better answer. So that's when I went down the rabbit hole and thought, how can I get this as simple as possible? How can I do it for my family? How can I help my future patients more? Now, that girl is now in high school. She's 15, and I can tell you we made it without any fillings and any baby teeth. And I've got 3 daughters, and so it works. And the frustration, I remember very clearly years ago, after a few years of practice. Of course, if you take over practice and you take bite wings on that 4.5-year-old, 5-year-old, and they have 8 interproximal MODOs, MODO, you're really good, get really good explaining, well, sorry. But it gets frustrating. And I thought, how can I help slow this down? And then I remember one time when my shower thought moment, when a parent said, but Dr. Lucas, I did everything you told me. Now this of course, and I still have cavities, this was 3 years into practice, because when you first start, it's everybody else's fault, right? They can't blame you because they didn't listen to you. But then you say more fluoride, brush, floss, and then that there's not many parents that maybe actually do floss, but that one that actually does, I go, what is the secret? And of course, we can't help everyone. Everyone knows soda's horrible for your teeth, and we tell patients, please don't drink soda, throw it away, but people still do it. In fact, even I, as a young dentist, still drank soda. I wish I could go back in time and get myself to not. So, but having said that, we at least want to give the advice that can work, and there's that small percentage of patients who will listen to us, who do want to do everything they can. And I want to have a playbook and a guidebook to help whatever percentage that practice is. And also, I want to help the patients that have trouble as best they can. Does this work? I get asked this all the time after I give a lecture, and I can say, yes, it does. The problem is you have to test it out on your own. You won't know for 3 or 4 years, but trust me, it does. And that's why I want to share it with you, because it's too good to keep a secret. Hundreds of times, almost thousands, I can't keep track. The first kid gets a bunch of cavities. They tell me, nobody ever told me how to prevent cavities. Why didn't no one tell this to me before? And then the next kids, 4 years later, 0 cavities. It works. Now, not everyone listens. Don't think I live in this idealistic world where I just do a car wash practice and don't do fillings, don't do GA. I do. But there's that small percentage of families that will listen, and they are so thankful, and I want to share that with you because it's so fun. So what am I going to do? I'm going to tell you my quick prevention principle, how I say it, but what the extra stuff is for the lecture is the science of why I think it's important, why it works, why I say it the way I do. Do I want you to copy me word for word? Of course not. That's not going to work for you. But you can pick and choose each individual principle or why I say it, make what works for you and your practice, your demographics, and hopefully this will help out. Now, the 3 Prevention Principles program, and you can get this more information on my website. I'm rebranding it as drlucasdds.com, but you can go to thedentistdad.com, and that'll get you there, and you can hand out things for free. So my name for this is Practical Prevention Using Human Behavior Principles. I know there's a lot of good data on motivational interviewing, and this is not exactly motivational interviewing. In fact, it's not, but I'll explain why I do the way I do, and there is science behind it, but I'm using the science and applying it to cavity prevention. So the goals, let's say the ideal prevention program, use time-tested human behavior principles. Now, my human behavior principles are from these 3 books. The Happiness Hypothesis, Switch, How to Make Change When Change is Hard. That book is all about how to change human behavior. So I'm using the principles from those books. And the Psychology of Persuasion. There's a lot of data in business. A lot of these are used for business and sales. They have lots of data on how to influence human behavior to get people to purchasing. We don't need anybody to purchase anything, but what we're selling the idea of health. We are motivational coaches. We want that family, whether they like to or not sometimes, that's the important part, is you have to ask permission. So after you ask permission, we're like a motivational coach. Or in my office, I have the dental assistants delegate this because I need to do doctor time. But the dental assistants love empowering the parents in the right way. So with the principles of influence, we want to sell health. We have 5 minutes to try to change the human behavior of this family, which also includes the mom and the dad, the grandma and the grandpa, and change it forever. And how do we do that? So that's part of trying to get the motivational change, because maybe we want to change, maybe they don't. And the minimal effective dose. That's an important principle I use. How to make it as easy as possible. I learned this principle from Tim Ferriss, author of many books and podcasts. But what's the least amount I can do? I joke with my patients and go, I want to be as lazy as possible. I want to do as little as work as possible. So if we make it as easy as possible, but it still works, that's the minimum effective dose. We don't need to be washing with baking soda after every meal, washing with xylitol after every meal. I've heard that in other books. I go, that's too much work. I'm lazy. How can we do this and make it simple? And ideally, the parents feel good afterwards. They like us. No shame, no guilt. And that's whether they change behavior or not. I don't want them to feel guilty if they don't change their behavior. I want them to feel loved and accepted. So that's an important principle to me. And also, I want it to work 99% of the time. No one can ever say 100%. But I want it to work almost every time if the parent follows exactly what I say. And I found with this new program, it does. You have to commit, and I'll teach you how I talk about that. But if they actually do listen to me, I want it to work. And I was frustrated when I first graduated, when my program didn't work for the people who listen to everything I say. Also, practical is not politically correct. So I'm not trying to be politically correct here. I'm not going for the national ADA guidelines. I want to help that patient in the chair that's in front of me right now with what's going on in their life and dealing with their spouse and their current environment. And also, I want to know what works for my family. What can I actually do? If I can't do it, I don't want to tell families to do it as well. And here's the real question. We as dentists, if you have a spouse or significant other, no one cares about teeth as much as we do. We see the kids crying. We see the kids in pain. We see the kids with abscesses. My wife's a teacher. She doesn't care about teeth. If I tell her to do something, if it makes her life harder, she'll go, no. And what I've learned is, I'm still married, thankfully, for the past 20 years, but what is the argument where you have to draw your line in the sand with the spouse? Because usually one spouse cares about teeth and health, and others don't. And guess what? Teeth aren't cared about as much as the rest of parts of the body, even though we know they should be. So we are more passionate than the patient 100% of the time. We can't help it. There's not people that come and go, oh, I'm so passionate about teeth. I've seen some are. Some they want to be healthy, but it's more rare. So what I had to do is, what argument am I going to have with my spouse? And if you have kids of your own, what argument are you going to have with your spouse? Where do you draw the line in the sand? So that's important too. All right, here is my prevention talk from top to bottom. Now I don't have someone with me, so we'll just have to pretend. Hello, Mrs. Smith. Would you like to hear about our cool new way to prevent cavities, to keep your kid cavity free, hopefully for the next 5-10 years? Oh, you would? Okay, great. Well, first off, cavities are much more common than you think. Over half of children get cavities by the age of 5, and sometimes you can get cavities without any sugar. Now, the other thing to realize is you don't lose those back baby teeth till you're 10 and 12. Most people remember the front teeth you lose at 6, but those back ones that your baby has, you're going to keep them for another 10 years. So that's why we're fixing cavities on 5-year-olds all day. The good news is we can talk about how to still eat sugar, keep things simple, and stay cavity-free if you'd like. Principle number 1, you may already be doing, but after you have milk at night, brush the teeth, and nothing except for water for the rest of the night. Principle number 2, every dentist knows this, keep snacks organized. Eat every 2 to 3 hours, don't eat every half an hour. Even healthy foods, if you eat them every half an hour, you'll accidentally get cavities. Principle number 3, there are some foods that are good for you that cause cavities, and there's some foods that are not good for you that don't cause cavities. So here's our nifty little snack guide. Now, when we hand this out, many parents are surprised that crackers are on the list. Turns out crackers are 9 times sticky as bread. So we recommend to switch from crackers to bread. I know it sounds crazy, but it's just like dried fruit. Dried fruit isn't bad for you, but if you eat dried fruit all day, oops, got a cavity. We find lots of reduction in cavities if you can switch to fresh bread, which you have to buy once a week instead of storing on the shelf. And the other fun thing we have is, guess what? If you must have dessert, ice cream is better if you must have dessert. Of course, you shouldn't have any ice cream. Don't get me in trouble with your medical doctor. But if you must have dessert, we recommend ice cream. And also, if you must have a treat, we recommend chocolate or peanut butter because it's higher in fat. So the take-home message is more chocolate, more ice cream, less crackers, less fruit snacks. Oh, and of course, we recommend to switch to water instead of juice and milk instead of chocolate milk. All right, that was it. Nice and simple. Now, I'll go into more detail or less detail depending on the reaction of the parent. If they seem engaged, they seem not engaged, or where they're at. Of course, you do have to meet the parent where they're at. But this is helpful information for everyone, and I feel like I want to tell the ideal recommendations to everyone no matter where they're at, and it's their choice whether they want to make that decision to change or not. Of course, I can see the argument for motivating change by asking what's one thing you can change, but I want to tell everyone I would recommend to change everything. I recommend no juice, no chocolate milk, if you ask me. Now, if we mean to make a compromise, then we do that, but I want to tell them that goal first for 100%, and of course, people don't listen to us all the time, so that's fine. Now, let's talk about some of the background and the why. First off, I first learned of this principle from the happiness hypothesis. How do humans make decisions? And according to Jonathan Haidt, They make decisions based on emotion, not rational thought. And at first I thought, no, not me. I'm very rational. I never make it based on emotions. Now his argument is he found people with traumatic brain injuries, and they injured the center of the brain that helps with emotion, and they could not make a decision to save their life. What's your favorite color? Blue? No, yellow. They couldn't decide what coffee. And his other, I guess, support for this is he says, and I do apologize if this affects anyone, but why do people cheat on their spouses? People don't wake up and say, hey, I'm going to cheat on my spouse, but you see it in the movies, you see it in real life, they'll do it, and then they'll rationalize it after. They'll say, oh, but see, you weren't there for me, you weren't supporting me, or something. And I've also seen this with my staff. All of a sudden I have happy staff, and something changes, and they're asking all these questions. And like, hey, do you do this? And I go, that's weird. And then they give me their 2 weeks notice, or maybe they're mad that one day, and maybe it's no notice at all. And all of a sudden, I'm the worst boss ever. And I go, what just happened? And what I realize is they may be leaving somewhere, and they don't want to rationalize and go, I'm leaving for an extra $1 or $2 an hour, because that would be trivial. So kind of like when you break up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and then you make up all the reasons why they were horrible, but maybe they weren't. Same thing. I've seen that before, and I go, oh, they're trying to rationalize their decision, because really they're going for a few extra $1 an hour, and now they're trying to come up with all the reasons why it wasn't as good. Now, I've tried to work on that over the years and see what I can improve to help with those emotions. And I'm not perfect, but it was kind of a weird concept for me, but it's very important when we talk about changing human behaviors, especially in others. So following up on that is from Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, right, by Chip and Dan Heath. So this book, they talk exactly what we want to do in dentistry. How do we change behaviors in others for the better? And this is the second time I heard about that. So they took the rider and the elephant metaphor from Jonathan Haidt's book, and they added to it. But in order to change behavior, we need the rider, which is rational thought, and the elephant. So again, Jonathan Haidt said we actually make our decisions based on emotion, and he came up with this metaphor. So Chip and Dan Heath said, well, how do we get that to go? One example is, let's say you want to work out more. What's the specific instructions? I know I'm supposed to exercise 30 minutes 3 times a week. So that's the rider. You need specific instructions in order to make a change. The elephant's emotion, when the alarm goes off and you go, no, I've changed my mind, and you put the shoes back on. So how do you actually make the change? Maybe you get a bad report from the doctor. Maybe you have a grandpa pass away from diabetes. Maybe you hear about some friend who gets divorced, and you go, you know what, I want to stay looking sexy, stay married. And then you go, okay, I'm going to start exercising. So you need that emotion in order to actually do the behavior and make the change. So to review, in order to change behavior, your prevention program must include, according to Chip and Dan Heath, specific instructions. So for example, switch from crackers to bread, switch from candy to ice cream. Those are my specific instructions. And they need to have emotion. One of those emotions is I can do it. So hope is what I recommend for an emotion, right? Do less work, not more. I think a lot of times we can use fear of, you're afraid of getting a cavity. That's actually not a great motivating tool. But hope is, I would argue, and Chip and Dan Heath do too, is a very good motion. So if we can make that easy and fun, then we can actually help influence behavior more. Now, of course, we're all doctors, and I get asked all the time, where's the science? Show me the science. I won't make any decisions or any changes unless you show me lots of science. And they say it just like that. No, I love the researchers, and I respect them. I'm not a researcher. I work in private practice. But here's my answer to where's the science is. All the science I need to know for caries is on this slide right here. Now, I do list some articles and some research. So if it's not on the slide, then that means it's here. So I will post some articles and some research, and there are some good ones. But it all goes back to you can't break the laws of physics, in my opinion. We know the Stefan curve, and we know the critical pH. And how do we know the critical pH? Because of basic chemistry. Hydroxyapatite, I had to look all this up, is a KSP of that big number. And how do we calculate the critical pH? Because we looked in a lab, and we had little hydroxyapatite crystals, and we added a drop of acid. Maybe someone did this a long time ago, many times, you can repeat it. And if you have a certain concentration of protons, the acid, and it's not below 5.5, you're in equilibrium, and the calcium's going back and forth. You have a rock sitting in water, it just doesn't spontaneously dissolve. Enamel can't break the laws of physics. It can't spontaneously dissolve unless something is knocking it out of equilibrium below 5.5. So if there is caries, if there's a disease, then something is out of equilibrium until we figured out what it is. There's also there's no super pH drop unless you're literally sucking on lemons or oranges. But 4.5 is the toxic pH to bacteria. So when the bacteria, they make all that acid and they're sitting in their own toxic waste product, they go, then they can't move below 4.5. So they just wait for the acid to wash away with the saliva. So it doesn't get super acidic. And then once it's gone, they look around and go, is there any more sugar left? Is it here? Is it gone? Oh, if it's still there, let me keep eating it and stay. I'm drowning in my own poop and toxins. So that's the toxic pH. So it doesn't go below 4.5. So guess what? If something's not there and sticking to the teeth, that's why we want things to rinse away, not be sticky. Oh, I know. So simple. And now, there is the Vipholm study, which will never, ever be repeated because this would never pass an IRB, ever, because they actually did randomized control studies on humans in a hospital and gave them different food to try to induce cavities or not. However, because it was done, this is where we first learned about frequency. And I pulled up the old article. Guess what? There's a correlation between eating more chocolate and less cavities. So I'll explain why, but we actually have a randomized control study on humans for chocolate right there. And that's where we first learned about frequency. But we're not going to be able to repeat that study. And also, let me ask you a question. Do you have a randomized control study, doctor, that proves that soda causes cavities? Do you? You don't, do you? Wait, how could you possibly recommend to not drink soda? There's not a random. I'm not going to change my behavior. You can't prove it. Just this morning, listened to all the different conspiracy theories, which are true, of the sugar industry making articles against us. So my point is, a lot of these, it would be impossible to pass an IRB to do a study to prove it. So I'm basing it on the biology and what I've seen. But again, you can't, if you just say, hey, you don't have a randomized control study for everything, I can't wait around for that. I can't wait around that for my kids, for my patient in the chair. Otherwise, you'll be 10, 15 years behind the science. So that is my answer for the science. Now, my old paradigm, where cavities come from, was this big blob of genetics, and then poor brushing or not flossing, and then poor diet. But a lot of it was just, I don't know, caries risk, virulence of bacteria. I'm sorry, I got very good explaining. Now, part of this is we want to save face. We don't want the parents to feel bad. And sometimes it's easier just to blame it on some outside source. Now, I don't want parents to feel bad, but I also want hope. And if they want, and they want to stop the cycle and not keep getting recurrent decay forever and ever, if they choose, we can't force everyone. I still fix a lot of cavities. I found this very frustrating. But my new paradigm, which is what I want to help bring you to. Now, I don't have any data on this. This is just in my brain of how I think about the world. But how my brain works. I don't get frustrated parents anymore. If they get cavities, they know. Kind of like if that parent's drinking soda, eating candy all day, or giving their kids candy and soda all day, they don't feel guilty. They know. You tell them. They're not. It's the parents that are trying hard. The parents that are trying hard. And then if they get cavities, those are the ones that are frustrated, right? So that's my point. If we give them all the information and they don't do it, they don't blame us anymore. And that's wonderful, right? But we just fix the cavity. There's no guilt. There's no blame. We go, oh, they happen. Processed food, American diet, no big deal. So now, can I change your paradigm to this in one lecture? No, but I want you to say, that's how I feel. That's how all of my thousands of patients feel. That's how my assistants feel. We just live it and breathe it, and it's great. Now, there's still some unexplained ones. I'm not going to say, but it's way less. It's not every day I have to go, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. There's nothing you can do. It just happens. Let's fix it. And now it's still a good, loving loving doctor, right? But I want to give the patients hope, and you can. Now, once a year, I'll have someone with acid reflux, and oftentimes I don't know it till they diagnose it later, right? So if I start hearing, I've got bad genetics, I go, do you have a history of acid reflux? And sometimes I go, actually, yes. And I go, well, okay, chalk that up to not diet. I call that systemic cavities. Vitamin D deficiency, maybe once every 3 years. I'll go, are you a vegetarian? Wait, do you live in Seattle? Wait, I don't get any sun up here, do you? No. Oh, and you don't drink milk and eat wild-caught salmon? And I actually recommend to go get tested, and I've had at least, I'd say, 6 to 12 times over my 17 years where either they'll send them off and get it. Actually, usually what happens is a few years later, they tell me, oh, we were vitamin D deficient. And the reason they found out is because they said they were getting hair in the shower, and they went to the doctor, and they tell me a few years later, I go, and there is a correlation study with the gold level of evidence by Dr. Philippe Pujol on vitamin D and the correlation of cavity. So those are two of my outliers. And and of course, if parents don't want to know, but the percentage of frustrated parents goes down dramatically when you change your paradigm. And this is the snack guide we hand out. You can get it for free, put your logo on it. Just put in your email on the website. It gets sent to you automatically. Now, I'm in private practice. I don't spend much time on my website. It's kind of boring because I'm busy working. But I made this 8 years ago, and hopefully it helps. So let me go over a few things with the snack guide. One thing to save you money is, even in my office, I don't recommend to hand it out every visit. We hand it out as the new patient experience. So that we do spend most of the time on education the first visit, because once we tell patients eat more bread, less crackers, we don't have to go over it every time, unless there's a reason for it, or if it's part of there are some programs or where we're supposed to do oral hygiene instruction, and so we do a shorter, quicker version. And we still ask permission though. But a few things. I found that having just pluses and minuses and bad and good versus evil, I didn't like that. So the left side of this is, we know it can't cause cavities. The middle is neutral, because in normal circumstances, you shouldn't get cavities from fruit. But we all know if you accidentally eat fruit every 30 minutes, you will. And same thing with milk. Whole milk shouldn't get cavities unless you go to bed with it in a bottle. So I have anything with any carbohydrates. And the reason I like smoothies instead of juice, it's the psychology of it. Nobody drinks a smoothie when they're thirsty, but juice you drink when you're thirsty. And that's what I recommend, no juice. But smoothies okay, which technically is a juice, but the psychology of it is what's important. I like that differentiation. And the right side, those are the surprise ones. And again, I don't bring up oranges and bananas all the time, but if it comes in conversation. And what I say, if they have crackers at preschool, I say, yeah, go ahead, let them have it at preschool, but try not to have it in the house. And and you can put your logo on here, and just sign up for the email list and get sent to you. And you can, I totally understand wanting to market your own office, and hopefully that can be helpful if you'd like it. But I don't recommend to hand it out to every single recall. But new patients is where I find it most useful. A few other things I got to talk about. If the chief complaint of the patient is they're referred from somewhere, or they have 8 cavities and you know they have 8 cavities already, I train my assistants, my staff. I say, don't go over the prevention principles. Don't ask, because prevention's too late. That's how I get a mom that's crying right in front of me. Because you talk about all the ways they could have prevented cavities, and then you talk about general anesthesia or crowns or Hall technique and all the metal, and then they start bawling in front of your face. And I don't like moms crying in front of my face. So in order to lessen that, I told all my staff, and I try to remind myself, don't even bring it up. Those aren't prevention visits. Now what I do is we make a note in the chart on that. So recall, haven't reviewed prevention, review it then. Because I still want to talk about it, but there will be much more accepting, not as large emotional response. Now, you know what's so funny? It's really funny when you just ignore it completely and don't talk about it, like bring it up at all. You just talk about the treatment plan, what to do. Almost 100% of the time, at the very end, the parents go, is there anything we can do, Doc, to stop or prevent these cavities? And I act surprised and go, oh, I'm so glad you asked. Well, here's my snack guide. Here's the quick version, but frequency, and crackers are stickier than bread, and here's a list. You can take it home to read it. We've got a really good prevention program, but I don't like to go into detail now because a lot of times it's emotionally overwhelming. But since you asked, here you go. Oh, anyway, so that little trick has really cut down on the moms crying in front of me. And then make a note and go over more detail later. But it's so funny how they'll ask you at the very, very end when you don't bring it up on purpose. So that's my trick for less tears. Now, speaking of asking permission, now it was hard to tell when we're doing it in a lecture, little tiny room without someone. But I train all my staff. This is really important. You must wait for the awkward pause. So would you like to hear about our new and improved ways to keep your kid cavity free? And you wait for them to say, well, yes, I would. Now, this is from the principles of influence. And one of the principles of influence of human behavior is the principle of commitment. When we commit to something, we're more likely to not change our mind, right? So they use this in, oh my gosh, let me tell you a story. When I was younger, I think it was before I was going to my honeymoon, I was with my wife and they said, you know what? Let's give you we'll give you a free hotel. You just have to listen to our timeshare presentation. And this is the trick they use. I didn't know at the time, but they say, is spending time with your family important? Well, yes, yeah, it is. So would you say like going on vacations is important for future family? Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, great. All right. And then I was sitting there. I was about to buy this timeshare. Now, I'm not judging you if you did. I didn't have any money. I wasn't even working yet. And my wife got me out of there and was like, snap out of it. These are used in business all the time. Now, having said that, you want to do this because this is the trick. If you say, do you want to hear about our cool new ways to prevent cavities? You wait for the awkward pause. Yes. Now you can talk for 5 minutes and they've given you permission. So instead of feeling like a lecture, they can find it helpful. And the first time this happens to you, you will be surprised. But every once in a while, someone will say, oh, no. And, my assistants, the first time they go, someone actually said no. And you just go, oh, okay. Now, maybe we do the really quick version. Maybe you don't talk about it all, but who knows? A lot of times what happens, you talk about prevention because you're trying to be helpful, because we're passionate. We want to help everybody. We're pediatric dentists. We want to help those kids. They may have felt judged at the other office. Maybe they're going to you because they didn't want to hear it. Maybe they just have a overconfident attitude and they feel like they know everything. So they go, no, I don't want to hear it. If you don't ask, that's the patient that'll go and leave you a bad review. Ask me how I know. Because I tried too much. I didn't ask permission. And I'm just trying to help. But guess what? Not everybody wants our help. So that can weed out that one kind of crazy person, or maybe the person who just goes, I'm not in the mood. And you can make a note and move on. You can still help that family, and that's fine. So that is very, very important. If you're training your staff, your assistants, you've got to teach them to wait for the awkward pause and get them to say yes. And that's how they actually feel appreciative instead of this person was lecturing me. Okay, so where were we? Also, again, you guys should be pretty common sense, but sometimes saying the simple things is important. That's what my grandma taught me. She went to UW Dental School, and she said, this is such a nice dental student. They explained everything, the crown, how we put it on. I go, I learned from my grandma, explaining the simple things is important, because to us, we know this. But if you don't say this, what would happen is I would sit there and talk about my cool prevention, and then at the very end, the parent would sit there and go, but I thought you lose your baby teeth when they're 6. Have you ever heard that? Yes. Guess what? 100% of parents don't know when you lose your baby teeth. You know why? Because our memories are weird. We don't actually remember things, but we think we do. Just ask any defense attorney. Our memories are worse than we think. We think they're good, but we remember things because we tell stories about them. And everyone has a story of their first tooth that they lose. There's no stories when you're 10. I asked the 12-year-olds, how many teeth do you lose? I don't know, in the last 2 years. 1? I'm like, I have x-ray evidence you've lost 12 in the last 2 years. Oh, nobody remembers. So just assume 100% of parents who walk in their door, even with Google, they're not looking this up. They don't care. They won't know. So you just tell them, because that way they'll listen to the rest of it, because that's what every parent is thinking if you just don't say that one little phrase. So we just say, hey, yeah, you lose the front ones when you're 6, but most people don't remember it. You don't lose the back ones when you're 10 or 12. Now, you just say that. Now, they'll act like they remembered it their whole life. That's totally okay. No problem. I want them to act like that. But you just proactively do it, because otherwise they'll say, oh, I thought you lose your teeth when you're 6. Oh my gosh. Just that little thing. And again, if you're training your staff, make sure they say that one simple thing. And also, we know this, but they don't. We know that for every 5-year-old that walks in, and we're taking our first bite wings, there's a 50-50 chance they have cavities. And depending which part of the country, which demographic, which city, who knows? Maybe it's higher. So tell them up front. I like to do it before I take my first bite wings, especially if it's a new patient. I go, oh, by the way, half of kids age 5 in America have cavities. If I tell them that, every parent just wants to feel normal, right? Of course, this is diagnosis versus prevention. But also, if we're trying to prevent cavities, they think that doesn't apply to me. Most people think they're above average driver. 80% do. But guess what? Not everyone can be above average driver. So just saying they're very common, they'll go, oh, and you can get them without sugar? Oh, weird. All right. So anyway, so just saying that simple fact, because we know, but they don't know. We say the same thing over and over in our script, but that new family comes in. You know what? Even if we taught every single parent in America everything we knew about cavity prevention today, a year later, there'd be new parents who weren't listening to that advice because they weren't parents yet. So that's why we're saying the same thing, because we're teaching the parents what we know, but they don't. It also takes away some of the guilt if it does happen. Over half of kids get cavities. You're normal. When I look at the bite wings, if I see 8 cavities, I say, congratulations, your child is normal. They have 8 cavities, and let's talk about what to do with them. So where were we? So you can have 0 sugar and still get a cavity. I think that's also important too, because most people think, oh, my kid's not going to get cavities. Well, not most people, but there's the certain families where they will try to avoid sugar. And I go, oh, I just feel, this breaks my heart. So many families, they avoid all sugar, but they just ate crackers all day. They got a bunch of cavities. So that's why I just wanted to let you know. I know it sounds really weird. So I also want to assume that everybody thinks we're weird, because we are. So if we talk about crackers, right, it's impractical. And of course, frequency is more important than sugar. And that's the other thing about crackers. They're convenient. You can eat them all day. And I also tell, if I'm having a one-on-one conversation, I will use what I call self-deprecating humor, which you can, this doesn't work for everybody. And I tell my assistants, like, you can't talk about my family because it's a joke that I can say about my family. But you can't say it unless, about me. But I say, yeah, when I first told my wife we had to get rid of the crackers, we had a fight. I had to sleep on the couch for a week. But my youngest, she's 10, and she's cavity free. And just every time my beautiful wife bought crackers, I throw them out, let her yell at me. So I kind of, because I know they think I'm crazy, so I accept that. And also because they're looking at me staring like, oh my gosh, my kid's favorite snacks, crackers, there's no way I can stop. So I kind of acknowledge that right away. And in a way, that's what in the sales technique, they call that raising an objection. I know what the parent is going to object to, so I raise the objection immediately because I know it sounds crazy, so I try to diffuse the situation with humor. And that's on a case-by-case basis, right? Our new way of preventing cavities is easier than the normal way, so we're hardwired to like new things. There's a study reference in the Principles of Influence book, and again, a lot of business research on this. And they hooked up electrodes to the subject's brains, and they gave them 2 glasses of champagne. And they gave the first glass. They said, this is a $8 glass of champagne. And they had them drink it. And go, okay, all right. And they measured all the electrodes, neurons firing. And they said, this next glass is $50. It's from France. So go and try it. And they try it, and electrodes would go off. And guess what? More electrodes went off with the fancier bottle, a glass of champagne. Guess what the experiment was? They were both the exact same champagne. But we're hardwired to like new things. So even if I've been saying the same prevention for the past 8 years, even if the dentist down the street is saying the same thing as me, I want to talk it up a little. It's new. It's improved. We got a new way to prevent cavities. I don't care if everybody's been saying the same thing. We're just making a little cool, just that little trick to go, oh, you got a new way? Cool. Yeah, I've been saying this the last 8 years, but Just saying that little thing, just a nice little thing to get them excited. So 3 principles. Again, I just thought 3 things is easier to remember than more than 3 things. Simple. Principle number 1, brush every night, only water afterwards. Again, every dentist is already saying this. Principle 2, again, every dentist is already saying this as well. Nothing new here. We all know about the Stefan curve. And if there's someone who's interested in the science, I may talk about the Stefan curve, but that's on a case-by-case basis. But the other way, if I'm explaining it to a classroom of preschoolers, I'll say, well, there's healthy foods, but our teeth need to rest, just like you need to rest. So that's why in between meals and snacks, you need to rest. So you don't, even healthy snacks, you don't want to eat all day. You just have them at snack time and wait 2 to 3 hours and then eat your drink again. Of course, water all day. And principle 3, again, I call this common sense that isn't common. Now, they did a study in the 90s, and they asked people what was sticky and what wasn't. And guess what? Everybody got it wrong. And that's when I realized we need to tell the world what's sticky and what's a starch. Now, of course, you can get sticky peanut butter on your teeth because it's low carb. That's fine. You get sticky cheese on your teeth. But most people, if you ask, they think bread's stickier than a cracker if you don't tell them. And so it was an epiphany to me, and I go, oh, people don't know crackers. I didn't know crackers were sticky. Back 8 years ago, 15 years ago, it was a secret passed on to dentists. And I, for my first 3 years of practice, I'm like, where are these cavities coming from? Where are they coming from? And then Dr. Nelson, he said, he had this other snack I'd used for a while. And I was like, Dr. Nelson, how do you know crackers are sticky? How do you know? It's like, my dad taught me. He was a dentist. I'm like, oh, why did no one tell me? So that's why my mission, my passion in life is to spread the message. And thankfully it's spreading. There's a nutritionist from New York this morning who was talking about crackers. I love it. Oh, now it's just, so anyway, but you're really focusing on is the secret, not just as an afterthought. Now, what I found after handing out Snack Guide for years, if you hand it out, look at it, parents will say, oh yeah, we don't give our kid any of this. And I go, I don't want to say this, but I'm like, you didn't even read this. You don't know what's on this. I could have put anything on this. But parents assume you're going to tell them the same boring stuff that dentists have been saying for decades. Yeah, don't eat candy. Oh, don't eat soda. Yeah, I know. I'm not dumb. That's what they may be thinking. So I've learned it's like giving the notes for a presentation before you give it and everybody's reading it, not paying attention. I just say right away, most parents are surprised to learn that crackers are sticky because most parents are. Now, just in the last few years, I've had some parents go, oh, I learned about the crackers were sticky, not good for you from somewhere else. I'm like, yes, the message is spreading. Keep spreading the message. So I just say most parents are surprised to hear it. Again, my goal is education. It's not my job to make them change their behavior. I want to educate in a nice, helpful, non-patronizing way, and then they can make that decision. Just like, hey, we recommend to switch from soda to water. They may go, oh, I'm not going to do that. But we're educating, everyone knows soda's bad for teeth. Not everyone knows crackers are sticky. And even if they do, they need specific instructions. Switch to fresh bread instead. So, and the cracker hypothesis. Sometimes I'll say this for parents. Now, everything at the end of the day is a hypothesis. But first published about 8 years ago by me. But most cavities that aren't from obvious causes are caused by crackers. Now, if this is true, which I call an obvious cause would be juice all day, soda all day, just frequent eating, bottle middle of the night. Those are obvious. Those are tried and true. Now, crackers has been a more obvious cause, but let's take it a step further. Maybe you already go, oh yeah, of course I know crackers are sticky. But what's the corollary to the cracker hypothesis? That throwing crackers into the trash is the number one thing you can do to stay cavity free if you're trying. So if you have kids and you're a dentist, I have to convince new associates dentists with kids. They're like, oh yeah, crackers are sticky, but I still give them to my kid. I'm like, are you serious? Do you not? This is the secret. I used to think when I first started this that you could just have it once a day, and then drink some water afterwards. That's my original advice. But I would still get surprised by 1 or 2 cavities. Usually it wasn't 8, but they still go, oh shoot, and I'm going for 0, baby. I'm going to fight this. So if you, because I want a plan that works 99% of the time. So you have to go all the way if you care. Not everybody cares. That's fine. And again, I had to have a fight with my wife, every few months. She'd buy crackers. I kind of joke about that. It's like, yeah, I know it sounds crazy. But yeah, give practical advice. You don't want to run out of snacks at the end of the week. So my wife would put bread in the freezer and then just toast it if you run out. You don't want to run out. But so bread is the easiest switch because it's just fresh bread and crackers are dried bread. So the corollary, of course, we know soda, we know juice, we know and obviously they're worse. We know they're worse, but crackers are sneaky because they're considered healthy, but they're not healthy. Because they're a processed food. And they spend millions of dollars to make these crackers irresistible so no human can resist them. So if you believe crackers are the cause of the cavities, then the corollary would be if you ask me, if you're talking to a patient that cares, I would recommend to throw them in the trash and never buy them again. That is the secret if parents care. And that's why they don't have to feel guilty. They don't do it like, oh, no problem. I still got a job security. I have job security. I kind of joke about that. We have job security. Now, what's the null hypothesis? I had to wrap my head around null hypothesis. A good way to prove the hypothesis is to try and prove the opposite true, the null hypothesis. So, for example, assume that crackers and cavities have 0 correlation and try to prove the hypothesis is true. So if that's the case, you'd tell everybody, eat as many crackers as possible over 3 years. I don't think that could pass an IRB. I'm sorry. However, there are a lot of snack guides out there that I've seen. Maybe I won't say a company's name, but they still say, oh, crackers are a healthy snack. I'm going crazy. Do you say dried fruit's a healthy snack? So it's still not 100% ubiquitous. My goal is to get this 100% ubiquitous. So that's what I started with. I tried to prove the opposite true. And then what I did for my years ago, before I took bite wings, I'd ask, in the last 3 years, how often would they eat crackers? Like, not once a day or less, or, 3 or more times a day. And I found a bigger correlation with interproximal decay when I asked that question. I didn't, way more than anything else. And that's where I started to go, I found like almost nobody would get 8 cavities if they said once a day or less. And then I started testing it by talking about prevention. And so if you're a true scientist and you want to prove something, just try to prove the opposite true. It's hard to do. Now, where are we? So my previous dogma, when I first graduated dental school, cavities are a multifactorial process, mostly out of our control. And I found that very depressing. And I said, I don't accept. Now, just yesterday, heard from Mick Ebling from Not Impossible Labs, and that was very inspirational. And I realized that's kind of how I feel about cavities. They told me it was impossible to stop cavities. There's nothing to do, just carries risk, and I don't accept. I want to help families who care. I want to help my own family, and you can. You just have to follow the no cracker plan. Throw them in the trash. No juice, no chocolate milk. Got to be 0. If you want 0 cavities, you have to be a little crazy. I tell parents, yeah, you're perfectly normal if your kid gets cavities by age 5. In fact, you have to be kind of weird to not get cavities. Again, these are kind of the extra additions I may throw in based on the face-to-face interactions. So, my new personal cavity dogma, that most cavities are caused by pH drop from carbohydrates. But there are those few systemic factors every once in a while. You got to watch out. I don't talk about oranges and lemons, but I have them on the list because once or twice a year, somebody has oranges 5 times a day. And I go, oops, I guess you didn't know that. So that's, I don't emphasize that, but that's why I have that on the list. Bubbly water, they'd have to have it all day or all night, but once every few years I run into that. Of course, GERD, also known as acid reflux. That just bypasses all the diet. So there are exceptions, and I've talked about vitamin D deficiency. Undiagnosed celiac, extremely rare, but if you run into that once, it's a lot of times that if they don't know they have it, that's well documented. Now, why does undiagnosed celiac disease cause cavities? We don't really know. My thought process would be you have your inflamed gut, you can't uptake calcium and or vitamin D, and then your teeth just fall apart because you're not ingesting the calcium because of an inflamed gut. I don't really know. It seems like a good hypothesis to me. And again, I don't run into that very often. only maybe 1 or 2 patients with actual celiac disease I can think of. Here is an old case study from a while back, and this was before SDF, this was before smart fillings. But someone drove to see me from far away because they were becoming uncooperative 4-year-old, and their dentist recommended general anesthesia. Now, we were able to do a few fillings. Mom was very motivated, changed the diet, able to get some crowns on, delayed treatment, and able eventually to get some crowns and fillings and prevent GA. And part of that is the motivational change in the diet. Now, I would have done smart fillings or hollow crowns maybe if it was now. But this next x-ray is what I'm most proud about. And that's the next kid. Didn't have any cavities. Mom threw out the juice, threw out the crackers, and the next kid totally cavity free. And that can keep happening over and over when you focus on diet. I know there's studies out there say, 50% is genetics. I don't agree with those studies. When you don't think about the cracker hypothesis, everything looks like it's just coming from nowhere. And guess what? If mom's eating crackers all day, maybe so is the kid. My sister-in-law had tons of cavities as a kid, and she didn't want that for her kids. All 3 of my nieces, totally cavity free. She's in charge of the Sunday school snacks. No crackers no crackers at Sunday school. You can change years of genetics with just by focusing on crackers and diet. It can happen, and you start it. You won't be able to really know and see, but you got to believe me. If you focus on it, it's way better than the old-fashioned way, and because it actually works. So anyway, this is what can keep happening over and over when you focus on diet. All right, we're going to transition to a little science, a little biochemistry. Now, I have heard before that sometimes some people go, I don't need all that biochemistry. That's boring. But to me, it's very important, because if I want to say you can stop cavities through diet alone, I want to know down to the molecule exactly why that is scientifically accurate. Again, remembering the principle, a rock doesn't dissolve in water. Hydroxyapatite can't dissolve unless things are out of equilibrium. An acid does not come from out of the blue, so I will go over that. Now, when I was in dental school, the analogy is the cheese and the apple, or the question, and they would say, well, if you eat an apple and you eat cheese afterwards, the pH would increase more quickly. And they said, and I looked it up, they said, it's probably the enzymes. I go, I'm a biochemistry major. What are the enzymes? What enzymes? I have a very simple explanation where I think explains it better. Is of course, the other thing they would say, well, if you eat an apple, the pH drops, so everybody's screwed, and everybody gets cavities, it carries risk. Sorry, nothing we can do. Oh, well, just keep fixing them. I don't like that either. So nobody gets cavities from eating apples, because you eat them in 5 minutes and they're done. You get them apple juice, of course, all the time, but not from apples. You can't eat them all day. But the cheese, I would argue, and I'll explain down to the molecule, I say it simply displaces the carbohydrate. And I think that's why it increases the pH. As we'll see, you can't get acid from fat or protein. But let's review why. You already know, but just to review. So it displaces it. That's what I'd say. It's not really an enzyme. Or you could say maybe it's this enzyme that causes all of the issues, lactate dehydrogenase. So again, I had to look this all up, but I want to review because I want to know down to the molecule, why does this work? Well, if I say that you can put cheese on your teeth, it won't cause cavities. If I say eat more chocolate, more peanut butter because it's high in fat, I want to know why. So this is the enzyme that converts pyruvate to lactate. That's where the lactic acid comes from, and it creates an electron carrier, NAD+. Now, pyruvate, if it could choose, I call it pyruvate's choice, because pyruvate can either make lactic acid or go to the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle on the electron transport chain. Now, it makes 2 ATP if it does lactic acid, and it makes 36 or 38 ATP if it does the Krebs acid cycle. Now, why would it do one or the other? Now, in biochemistry, my professor said it's probably, why would you possibly make why would you make 2 ATP? It makes no sense. Now, and our bacteria, are they just always spitting out acid? Kind of in dental school, I thought, yeah, they just love acid. They're acid loving. They just spit out acid. But no, that's not true. Now, they go back, and in the test tubes in vitro, they called what's called a high affinity pathway and a low affinity pathway. So a high affinity pathway, let's say you have very low concentrations of glucose, of sugar, carbohydrates. If you have very low concentrations, just a little drop, and you're a bacteria, you have a plate of food in front of you, and you eat one molecule of glucose, what pathway does it do? It does what's called the high affinity pathway, and that is making 36 ATP. You have low concentrations of carbohydrates, there is no lactic acid made. It won't make it. Now, why is that? I kind of picture you have a plate of food and it's coming at you. It's dropping through the holes and the enzymes and the van der Waals interaction, and it gets sucked in the electron transport chain. Now, once all those holes are filled, but they calculated and they increased the concentration of carbohydrates, and concentration is what's important. And you can, in a lab, you keep increasing the concentration of carbohydrates. And once you get to a critical point, which can be mathematically calculated, then all of a sudden, boom, lactic acid is made. And that's a low affinity pathway. So lactic acid is proven over and over. It's not made in normal situations. And in fact, low concentrations of carbohydrates, none is made. You have to get past a certain threshold. Because if I'm a plate of bacteria, so now I've got everything, it's coming at me, and I can only eat one food at a plate at a time because it's right in front of me. I take up physical space, and so do carbohydrates take up physical space. And now it's all coming, and then all of a sudden you get 3 molecules, and I'm still making ATP. Don't need to make lactic acid, but that one extra one, like, a little poop out a little lactic acid. Now, what happens if I get a bolus of sugar? It's all raining down on me. What do? Guess what? I need more electron transport carriers. I need to make more energy because this is going to pass. If I don't make energy right now, I may never be able to reproduce. Quick, get me more NAD plus from electron transport chain. I don't care if it spits out toxic acid. Poop, 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 poop. That's probably why this pathway exists. It's not to make the 2 ATP. It's to recycle the NAD plus so I can make more 36, 38 ATP, depending on prokaryote to eukaryote, as fast as possible. Quick. Spit out acid. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is yucky, but I still do it anyway. Right? So that's why if you eat broccoli and you don't make it into a smoothie and you don't break down the cell walls, that's why broccoli won't lower the pH. That's why spinach won't lower the pH. Yes, that's why we know you don't get cavities from broccoli, but I saw dentists before when I was younger. They're like, you can leave spinach between your teeth. You won't get a cavity. Because I just proved it because of the high affinity pathway, low affinity pathway, because I know the biochemistry, so I feel confident. Now, I'm not saying you should leave it. That's kind of gross if you have spinach, but what you eat is what matters because of this. That's why we can have confidence when we're talking about diet. Now, fat doesn't get converted to lactic acid. I just want to double check. I knew that, but I just want to remember exactly why. So I drew this. This was when Game of Thrones was busy, and I looked at my own chemistry textbook and I just doodled this little cartoon. But if you're listening, you may not be able to see it. But acetyl-CoA is what the fat gets converted to, and that goes to Krebs acid cycle. It's not high enough on the chain, so you can't make lactic acid with fat. So that's why you eat cheese, won't get a cavity. You get cheese stuck between your teeth, don't need to floss it out, won't get a cavity. You get peanut butter stuck between your teeth, don't need to floss it out. I tell my patients, you could rub peanut butter all over your teeth and you won't get a cavity even though it's sticky because it's low carb. Now, I'm not recommending you do that, but that concept's important. And again, going to why we should eat more fat and more protein and less sticky, starchy carbs that are addictive and get stuck to your teeth. And of course, thankfully, over the last 10, 15 years, we're less afraid of fat. When I graduated, it's like, oh no, low fat diet. Oh, it's horrible. So there's electron transport chain. Now, there was a study in the AAPD journal, the Pediatric Dentistry Journal, and they took slabs of teeth. I don't know why this wasn't shouted on the rooftops at the time. And they had Streptococcus mutans, and they cycled different substances, including skim milk, whole milk or full fat milk, and 2%, but semi-skimmed. And as controls, they had lactose-free and basically chocolate milk. They had whole milk with sucrose. And they cycled it, and they measured the pH drop and demineralization. And guess what? Only the whole and whole lactose-free milk kept the pH above the demineralization threshold. And in skim and semi-milk, so fat-free and 2% milk, it induced similar demineralization to the sucrose control, although slightly less for 2%. Now, why is that? Wait, skim milk demineralizes it? Now, again, going back to our plate of food, and this type, it's a cup. Whole milk has 12 grams of sugar. Skim milk has 12 grams of sugar. But if you're a bacteria, you can only eat a plate of food at a time. So what happens when you take away the full fat milk? You take away the fat molecules. You have increased the concentration of sugar. And guess what? The high affinity pathway, low affinity pathway, whether you make lactic acid or not, depends on the concentration of sugar. It's not the amount of sugar. And that's what I want to spread the message. We focus too much on the amount of sugar as dentists. Go ahead and let the nutritionist talk about the amount of sugar. But as dentists, as bacteria, we don't care about the amount of sugar. We care about the concentration of sugar and the frequency, of course. So whole milk has the fat. So you've got these fat molecules. I'm like, oh, let me fill this up. That means you have to, in a plate of food, fat takes up physical space. So if you have physical space in your plate and there's fat molecules, there has to be less carbohydrate molecules in that same plate of food at the same time because of the concentration. It's not the amount, it's the concentration. Whereas skim milk, you've taken away all the fat molecules. So your whole plate of food is only carbohydrates. So then all of a sudden, you can actually shunt to the low affinity pathway and make lactic acid. And it's correlated, the 2% does somewhere in the middle. So, thankfully the trend has been to recommend whole milk. And I don't go into a deep conversation and say, oh, you've got to drink whole milk instead of skim milk, because I would still argue skim milk is going to be better than juice by far. But if you ask me one-on-one, we should be recommending whole milk as dentists, and we should stick with that. But we concentrate too much on the amount of sugar. It should be the concentration of sugar. And guess what? Full fat versus skim milks in other areas. The Association of Dermatology, back in 2008, they found a positive association between the intake of skim milk and acne. And they kept finding this enough where they actually put in the guidelines that maybe carbohydrates have a correlation with acne. Now, do we know why? Now, I wish I would go back and tell my high school self, who got a lot of acne, because I was having all skim milk and soda. Oh my gosh, it was bad. Do we really know why? I don't know why. But I'm not a dermatologist, but I did talk to dermatologists. This is my theory. We know that in perio, that the inflammation of gums is the host's immune response to toxins. What is lactic acid? We already know it's a toxin. You have more lactic acid, you have more toxins. And I think some people, as I talk to dermatologists, some people are inflammation kings and queens, and some people don't get a lot of inflammation. So I think some people can have a lot of skim milk and sugar, and they don't get a lot of inflammation, don't get acne. But some people like me, they have more skim milk, more carbohydrates without the fat, and then increases lactic acid, and their body reacts to it with inflammation. Can I prove that? No, that's my theory. But anyway, it makes it, you can show the correlation over and over. So to me, that makes sense. Our body's not designed to be having lactic acid all the time. Of course, our normal American modern processed diet sets us up for inflammation all over the body, and including the mouth. And cavities is a disease of the modern world. We should not be designed to eat the modern food, like crackers. Just eat fresh bread. It's fine. So I came up with what I call the starch ratio. Maybe somebody can help me publish it. I'm not a good publisher, and I don't have a lot of time, but I've got these crazy ideas. So if anybody can help me publish the starch ratio, we could get our names up there. I'll let you can be first author. I don't care. Just anyway. So the starch ratio, again, based on the plate theory of a bacteria eating food. And I calculated everything that's a carbohydrate versus not, because we know you can't make any lactic acid if it's protein, fat, or fiber. Fiber gets lumped into carbohydrates for some reason. I don't know why, unless they changed this since I've done it. But because it technically is the glucose change linked together. But fiber, it does not count towards lactic acid production. So crackers, if I do the ratio of starch to fat and protein, and there's no fiber. It's 2.1. Dark chocolate, the starch ratio is 0.6 because of the higher fat and fiber fat content. And guess what? If we make the same ratio for whole milk, that's also 0.68, close, almost exact same as dark chocolate. And skim milk is 1.4. So it's in between crackers, which is really high in starch because there's no fat to offset anything, and whole milk. And remember, in vitro, the skim milk actually induced demineralization. So when you eat dark chocolate, you like eating sticky whole milk. If you eat milk chocolate, it's like eating sticky skim milk. And that's why I can say, if you must have a sweet, I recommend chocolate. Now, I would recommend dark chocolate. It's the best, but my kids didn't like it. And so like I said, I'd still rather have a kid eat normal chocolate instead of a Skittle or Sucker any day of the week if you have to have a treat. So I stand by that. And that's the reason. Now, of course, we know if you have milk all day, whether it's whole milk or not, you go to bed with a bottle in it. That's still not good. So don't eat chocolate all day. But we know that for everything. That's true with fruit as well. But again, I go back to both of these have 12 grams of sugar. It's a concentration that matters. One thing that's important. People say this, and it's incorrect all the time. I don't say, hey, you're wrong. But chocolate's actually very sticky. Chocolate is sticky. You measure it, it's sticky. Like peanut butter's sticky. But if you get peanut butter stuck on your tooth, you don't care because it's low carb, it's high fat. That's why chocolate's better. You get chocolate stuck on your teeth, who cares? It's because it's higher fat content. So people say, oh, chocolate rinses away. That's not true when you measure it. Chocolate actually is sticky, but it's the higher fat content that makes it protective for your teeth compared to just pure sugar like a Sucker or a sticky candy. Now let's look at this a little more. So there's quite a few studies on chocolate we already talked about Vipholm, where you had a randomized control study with a correlation on humans that showed a correlation with more chocolate and less cavities. But let's also look at in vitro, a bunch of different chocolates. Now for all three of these studies, they measured the pH drop in saliva based on different foods over time, and you can see the Stefan curve. And of course, with all the controls, sucrose is by far the worst, just pure sugar, and of course sorbitol is none. Milk chocolate is less than sucrose by a significant amount. Now remember, if we were mathematicians and we were measuring how much demineralization would occur, it would be a calculus equation to measure the area where the pH is between 5.5 and 4.5. And during that time is when you would be in demineralization. You could calculate the amount of demineralization that would exist. So the area under the curve tells you how much demineralization would occur. So if you have a smaller area by 50%, theoretically that would be 50% less demineralization. So here, milk chocolate is significantly less than the sucrose, pure sugar. But guess what? Dark chocolate is even less than that by another portion. And if you add hazelnuts to milk chocolate, you add nuts, which have more fat, then that's the same as dark chocolate. So again, milk chocolate's better than pure sugar. Dark chocolate is better than milk chocolate, but it's hard to get people to do dark chocolate. But if you really want the best results, do dark chocolate. And here they actually calculated the area underneath the equation, and they found plain European chocolate was 0.4. So that's a 60% reduction compared to the sucrose control. You know what else reduces cavities by 50 to 70%? Fluoride. And we go, yay! And if you change what you eat by adding fat and you reduce it by 50 to 7%, yay! And guess what? This just measures the equation from zero. Theoretically, if you lower the pH and it never gets to 5.5, just like the whole milk did not get to 5.5 in vitro, then you would have zero demineralization. So the area under the curve is reduced by 60%, but there's a chance, it's hard to prove, that you would get zero demineralization. I believe you could put dark chocolate all over your teeth based on these in vitro results and the ratio of fat to protein and never get a cavity. But I know you could rub peanut butter all over your teeth, even if it's Skippy. There's not enough sugar to add. So I don't have that fight with my wife about Skippy. Even though, I would argue that I don't want sugar in the peanut butter. But you don't get cavities from a little sugar in the peanut butter because there's so much higher fat content. And I can say that with confidence based on my in vitro findings and my mathematical calculations. And another chocolate study, again, showing dark chocolate is the best. Milk chocolates is still better than sucrose. So over and over, you get a reduction in the acid attack and the pH drop. So if it is impossible for fat to cause cavities, then eating fat prevents cavities, because you can only eat so many things. So again, I'm of the kind of paleo movement. I don't always eat paleo, and I definitely still enjoy my occasional beer. But what I tell my patients and my kids, if it's real food, if it's food from the farm, it's not processed. It doesn't have the flour. Like, we're not talking about fried chicken. That's still processed food. But I tell my daughters, don't be afraid of a cheeseburger. That's meat, cheese, and bread. People tell you it's not healthy. Just eat the meat and the cheese. Don't be afraid of fat. It gets been over vilified, in my opinion. And I believe the processed food, the flour, and deep fried in oil, that's what kills you faster. Everything kills us eventually. But yeah, I don't want my patients or my own kids to be afraid of fat like we were when I was a kid and everybody was telling us it was horrible. If it's real food. And again, if you were to rub peanut butter all over your teeth before bed, it would actually have a preventative effect, right? Now, don't actually do this, but what you put between your teeth is what is more important. And if you don't put things in between your teeth that don't stay there, that's the secret to preventing cavities. So I can say with confidence, dark chocolate is better than a cracker based on the starch ratio and high affinity and low affinity pathways, my understanding of biochemistry. And of course, we know Vipholm for at least one randomized control study, which can never be repeated again. I'm sorry, even if you want to. Now, a few other concepts. Diffusibility matters. Diffusibility matters. Remember, if you're a bacteria, this is not really bacteria because it has a cell membrane, but I wanted to be a cartoonist when I was younger, so I drew this cartoon. But if you're a bacteria, you're sitting there floating there. You have no arms, no legs. The reason why we think that sucrose is so horrible for teeth is because it's diffusible. It can float to the bacteria, right? So you need something to float because it's sitting there. It's got to get access to it. And so it can cross the membrane. If it's a big chunk of cell wall of fiber of broccoli, that may scrape the bacteria away. And they go, I can't break that down. So diffusibility matters. That's why flour matters. Now, flour is a starch, which is a bunch of glucose molecules attached to each other. And a complex carb is all those attached. A simple carbohydrate looks like this. And what is a processed carbohydrate? You chop up that complex carbohydrate into tiny, tiny little particles. And guess what? That's why pancakes taste great. That's why cupcakes taste great. That's why all that stuff made of flour, like it's donuts. It starts to taste like sugar when you grind it up so much, even though it was a complex carb at some point. So there's there's the flour and how powdery it is. And of course, sucrose is also can be soluble in water. Now, I was just looking at this up and found it randomly, but apparently flour is so weird and processed that there are explosions that actually have unfortunately killed people, and it's a big deal. There's 115 dust flour explosions between 1994 and 2003. Those are the most recent numbers available. It is a huge safety issue. So when I didn't quite understand, my processed food, unfortunately, most people, they just eat processed food. But my point is, this is not healthy. It once was real food. You grind it up into such tiny particles, it can explode. That doesn't make sense. And we're trying to we don't have to get into the argument. My point is, crackers are not a healthy food. They're a highly processed food made by the food industry. But guess what? You can still eat processed food. Just have fresh bread. That's the hack. Just switch from dried bread to fresh bread. That's it. But we shouldn't be going. I don't feel guilty about saying don't eat crackers because they're not really a health food. That's what diabetics eat to spike their blood sugar. So anyway, so just kind of fascinating because that made me think, oh, this is not good for you. Now, also an important note, peptidoglycans are what make plaque sticky. I believe you can change your virulence of bacteria. And I got to figure out a way to prove it by feeding the good bacteria. You either feed the good bacteria or you feed the bad bacteria. Now, in vitro, they did a study where they took away all the sucrose, and they had streptidoglycans making its biofilm. And when they took away all of the sucrose, because guess what? Sucrose is the substrate to make peptidoglycans. Peptidoglycans is that fancy molecule that makes plaque sticky and can attach to all the other bacteria in the biofilm. But that's why Streptococcus mutans is the most virulent, because it makes things sticky. But if you have no sucrose, you can't make peptidoglycans, because that's what it's made out of. And in vitro, when they took away all the sucrose, the Streptococcus mutans fell off the agar plate and it disappeared, just like Sandra Bullock in Gravity flying away. Now, I'm middle-aged. I've tried a lot of weird, crazy diets, but I've noticed if I do experimental low-carb diet, like 0 sugar for 3 days, I have almost no plaque in my teeth. And this is my other crazy explanation. It's hard to prove, but I have a parent there, and I go, wow, everything's great. I don't see the gingivitis. Everything's wonderful. And the mom looks at me like, oh my gosh, are you crazy? My kid never brushes his teeth. I want you to yell at him. Like, I don't know what to tell you. There's like no plaque. And they go, are you a nurse? And they go, yeah, I'm a nurse. You give your kid like normal healthy snacks like apples and carrots? Oh yeah, no sugar. Guess what? If you don't have large boluses of sugar throughout the day, there won't be as much plaque to clean off at the end of the day. It won't grow as fast. It makes brushing easier. You eat foods that clean your teeth for you, like an apple. You can't eat apples all day. You're not going to get crazy amounts of plaque. There's no study that shows toothbrushing, except for when it has fluoride toothpaste on it, the mechanical action, because you're always going to have some plaque there by the end of the day. It's the amount of time your teeth spend in acid that's important. You're never going to get rid of all the bacteria. And you can make your plaque less sticky. And then I go, gingivitis. What's gingivitis from? I don't know. Can't prove it. But maybe it's more frequent lactic acid gets more gingivitis. Now, of course, brushing's super important, but it's you get less sticky plaque if you don't have sucrose, which is sugar. Now, this is why whole grain flour is not the same as whole grain. If you eat whole grains of quinoa, the bacteria can't break that down fast enough to make lactic acid. But you grind it into flour, so I would argue whole grain flour is better than white flour. But the flour, especially if it's sticky, is not the same as whole grain itself. It's not a real food at that point. And it doesn't take rocket science to tell which one's stickier. And again, our job is just to tell people what's sticky because they don't know. But again, so crackers are 9 times sticky as bread. I've tested it myself. I looked it up. I tested my kids and I watched. And guess what? It's not twice as sticky. It's not 3 times as sticky. It's not 4 times. Not 5. It's 9 times as sticky. Bread is so sticky it sticks to itself and falls off. So this is the number one thing you can be talking about it. If you're not talking about it in your practice, might as well give up. At least mention it. At least give parents a chance, and your own kids a chance. If you don't throw away the crackers, you could get lucky. But hey, I want to have all the odds in my favor. This is my 5 minutes of fame, where I did a little experiment and showed, bread falls right off the plate when you mix a little water, and crackers stay stuck there. So, yeah, that's a fun experiment. I'll make sure to do it a few times if I change the different variables, like any scientific experiment. But it worked 19 times out of 20. So P is less than 0.05. And here's Dr. Jared Johnson's cool graphic of showing things are sticky. And again, sticky peanut butter, fine. Sticky cheese, fine. But sticky starch, not so fine. So sometimes get asked, well, what am I supposed to eat, doc? What am I supposed to eat? My kid loves crackers. I can't eat anything else. Just anything. Eat anything else other than crackers. Fresh bread is the easiest answer. Bagels, toast, put peanut butter on the toast, string cheese, apples, cheeseburger, pizza, ice cream, nuts, vegetables, fruit, eggs, chocolate. Just anything else. But fresh bread is the easiest substitute, simple answer. Although I will say, my daughter, for lunches, instead of crackers in the lunch, I put in salami. easy fix. Yeah, have some meat. It makes them full faster. We still had yogurt. I don't care about the sugar in the yogurt because I'm not a nutritionist, and the sugar rinses away. So I got the cheap yogurt and then some fruit, sandwich, but just no crackers and lunch. Obviously water or whole milk, not the chocolate milk. So here's where I get a little controversial, and this is where if you liked all the rest of my talk and you don't like the next few slides, that's okay. But I want to pass on the fun I've been having with my patients the last 8 years because it is so fun. And there's a small group of us that don't talk about this. But throwing out crackers is more effective than flossing. Let me explain. Well, this is what I say to my patients. This is so much fun. I just can't help but share this. But I've been doing this the last few years, and it sounds crazy. I'll explain later. But they go, yeah, we're having trouble flossing. I go, flossing. And guess what? I have good news for you. I'm no longer recommending flossing baby teeth. What? Yeah, floss adult teeth because you can get gingivitis, periodontal disease, and that's super important. But baby teeth, what you eat matters more. I'm lazy. I just pick foods where I don't have to floss. Guess what? You eat cheese, get stuck between your teeth. Don't have to floss. You eat an apple, don't have to floss. Eat spinach, don't have to floss. Eat fresh bread, don't have to floss. There's nothing stuck between teeth. Eat a bunch of peanut butter, jam it in there. Don't have to floss. I'm lazy, so I just pick foods I don't have to floss. Well, can I just eat crackers and just floss after? You're not going to do that. You're really going to... Also, are you going to eat crackers and then floss immediately after? Because if you eat crackers at lunch and you floss 8 hours later, that's not going to work. It was already there for 8 hours. You just eat foods that don't stay stuck. That's the secret. That's why it's more effective. It sounds crazy, but I'll talk about that. So this, ironically, if any of you get an emotional response right now, it's kind of funny. And this is where I get, where's the science? Where's the science? And I understand, because we're scientists, we're doctors. So it's weird. Let's go back to why this is weird. Remember how humans make changes and make decisions. We make decisions, the rider and the elephant. We make a decision based off an emotion, and then we rationalize it later. So if I tell someone who's very passionate, just as passionate as me, and we all care about kids, we're fighting this disease. It's tough. I get it. And you've been saying something for 20 years, and remember the law of commitment? It's hard to change, right? How could I possibly say anything, and how there could be any chance I don't... So, just hear me. Now, what I want to say is, can we be a scientist and look at this? So in other words, and if you don't like this slide, because I get a lot of pushback from this slide alone, so just you can just erase it. But I at least want to talk about it because I'm having so much fun with my patients, and it works. Now, Dr. Philippe Pajot is an epidemiologist at UW, and he actually did one of the what we call gold standard levels of evidence, a meta-analysis on flossing. And there are actually 2 other meta-analyses. So when we say we want the gold level of evidence, we want evidence-based what we're saying. But we look at the evidence on flossing, we use our emotions, and we say, no way, it's got to be wrong. But is it? My new paradigm, diet trumps everything. Throwing out crackers, the last 5 years, I haven't even talked to my patients about flossing. My youngest daughter's 10. I never didn't floss her teeth once. Every time my beautiful wife bought crackers, I'd throw them away. Let her yell at me for a week. So now when parents ask me, do I need to floss? Guess what? If you can, I don't recommend flossing baby teeth, but you have to throw out the crackers in the trash. That's we're all crazy about something, so that's the thing I'm crazy on. And my parents, they love it. They're like, I don't floss. They cry. They go, thank you. So that's why I want to share this, even if it puts my neck on the line, please. But guess what? This is the highest level of evidence, but I get the most pushback because of the emotion. Because if you can't come up with a rational response, you go, that's where it is. And this is my new paradigm. Again, the science explains this. What happens is we see the patients. We don't take bite wings till 4.5 to 5 because of usual behavior. If we can get them earlier due to caries risk, sure. But a lot of times that's a pretty normal age in my office. And then, they got 8 cavities. Now, what happens when they turn 5? A few things. Now we fix them, and the dentist gives really good prevention advice, starts fluoride. Also, what happens at age 5? The kindergartner goes to school. What happens at school? The teacher will set rules and boundaries so they can't snack all day, because at home, maybe the parent didn't. And dentists give great advice all the time. Cut back on juice, cut back on soda, less frequent snacking. Maybe they did mention the crackers. So, So this is my new paradigm, which you're not going to be able to change your mind right away. But the evidence actually supports it. And when I tell my patients, I go, yeah, my professor, he actually did the study, showed flossing does not prevent cavities, but all the other dentists, they just ignore it. So I'm like the 1 out of 100 dentists who says you shouldn't floss baby teeth. Adult teeth, yes. Because you keep your adult teeth for so much longer. And even dogs lose their teeth due to gum disease. So, but for baby teeth, so the reason why I talk about that, it's more fun, it's practical, it's more awesome, it's easier. Throwing the crackers in the trash and never buy them. Anyway, it is so much fun. However, you're not going to be able to change overnight. And please, if you don't, I understand. You can't change your mind like that quickly. Even I couldn't. I had Dr. Philippe Pujol as my professor, and I'm like, no way. Every other dentist recommends, they can't, that's crazy talk. Totally crazy. But here's the baby steps, because you can't do it overnight. But I want you to join me on the fun, because when you can tell a parent, guess what? I'm the 1 out of 100 dentists that says you don't have to floss baby teeth, and I have a solution that will work, that will make your life easier, where you just have to buy one thing at the store and don't buy this one thing, and you do less work. Because are you really going to hold them down? There's no hope. Like for some of those, sure, maybe you get really good at convincing them. But guess what? If you just you do all the other stuff you've been doing for years, and you just forgot one day to stop talking about flossing, you'd have the same effectiveness. That is my crazy theory. But I've been doing it in my office, and it's so wonderful. It's so fun. I can't not share this, even if you don't believe me at first. So these are the baby steps. Read the gold standard randomized control meta. Nobody actually sits down and reads it, right? You just hear their headlines like, that's silly. That's no. This is real research. And there's 3 of them. 3 of the best levels of evidence possible. Dentists just ignore them because we go, that doesn't make sense. It does if you change your paradigm. The diet is the secret. So I started by de-emphasizing flossing, because I was like, I can't just stop that. So I would talk about the crackers, and I'd say, well, I recommend to floss the teeth that are touching. But I wouldn't put my energy and efforts into it, because where do you got 5 minutes to change your life? What is the minimum effective dose? And I'm telling you, the secret is throwing out the crackers. That's the minimum. You want to be as lazy as possible? That's the secret, the minimum effective dose. You can say, there's a crazy dentist that has an alternative theory that throwing out crackers makes flossing not necessary for cavity prevention, but I don't believe him yet. So maybe just floss just to be on the safe side. That's totally fine. Or start asking parents before you take the first bite how frequently they would eat crackers and cereal each week. Listen closely to what the Cavities family say. And then it's going to take a while, even if you did go, maybe he's got a point there. You can't change the habits overnight. And I don't recommend you should, but it is so much more fun. Now,
what does p less than 0.05 mean? It means if you assume the null hypothesis that your data is only going to prove the null hypothesis true 5% of the time or less. That also on the flip side means if you accept the null hypothesis, you do 20 studies and you get the null hypothesis proved correct 5% of the time, the null hypothesis still could be true even though 1 out of 20 studies prove the null hypothesis is true. And this is indeed what we see if we look at the evidence for flossing. That's assuming everything gets published. There's probably even more studies that maybe don't get published. If you're doing a master's project and you have a study and you go, oh shoot, this doesn't support what I want it to do, maybe I won't publish it because my lead researcher will be upset with me because of emotion. But what dentists, if you actually read the meta-analysis and you look at the studies, the one study that does show flossing prevents cavities is when dentists do it professionally at the school after lunch. And dentists say, see, if they just did it right, it would work. See, we just got to do it right. Now, I look at it from the diet perspective with the diet and cracker hypothesis, and I think, actually, that makes a lot of sense, because what do kids eat at school? They eat crackers. So yes, I would agree under that hypothesis. If you immediately flossed it after, it would work. Now, does that mean we should tell everyone to floss after eating crackers? That's not going to work. That's not practical. Oh, well, what if we just floss at night after you eat crackers at lunch? Is that really going to work? It's going to be stuck in between their teeth for 8 hours? Again, I'd argue switch to bread. It doesn't get stuck in your teeth. That's going to reduce the cavities. And then it's a very valid point that says, well, maybe if you can't, have some cheese after. And I would say that probably does help. However, I'm not going for 50% less cavities. I'm going for 100% less cavities. For 100% less cavities, I don't know how much that cheese is going to displace the cracker. So if you ask me, and you're going for 0, I recommend to throw out the crackers. Throw out the sticky starches. Only eat food that won't cause a cavity if it gets stuck between your teeth or doesn't get stuck. Now, I would argue, yeah, it's true if you just can't have some cheese, but I'm going for 0. So if you ask me, that would be my advice. Now, not everybody has to listen, and there's good compromises, but switching to bread is relatively easy if you make it important and you want to do it.
But I felt like in my early years, when I didn't know about crackers and didn't emphasize that, it was like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill forever. So frustrating. I feel with this new paradigm, you can have hope. You can have change. You can help. You're already helping thousands of families. You can help even more. And I've got one other bonus thing for you. Guess what? This is how you deal with parents who are anti-fluoride. You can't, of course, I like topical fluoride, and I use it frequently. But this is what I do. I go, well, one, you have to ask permission. Do they want to hear about prevention principles? Because maybe they don't. But if they do, you go, yeah, it is possible to prevent cavities without fluoride. Fluoride's it's like a supplement. It helps by 50 to 70%. Some people need most people with American diets need extra credit. And here's the thing is, most people can't stay cavity free without fluoride. I can tell you how it's possible, but you probably can't do it because it's so tough. You're not going to, but here's the secret. You've got to throw out the processed food. All right? You got to do even more. In fact, breakfast cereal, have oatmeal, have eggs. You got to even not do the cereal and the milk. Usually I don't talk about cereal milk because it's not as sticky. But if you want to stay fluoride free, you got to be a little crazier. No crack. Now, you can still have processed food, but you have to have bread, not cracker. You have to throw and no juice, no. I know you probably can't do it, but if you wanted to, that's how you would do it. So anyway, I only have a small percentage, very small percentage of families that are fluoride free, but I actually agree with them. And then we don't have to get in an argument. Now, the real problem is we want them to care about health of teeth, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if I don't fight it anymore, but I can still help them. And if not everybody listens, but that is helpful because we have a modern American diet. If you have a weird, not modern American diet, then you don't need the extra credit as much, is my belief. But anyway, you can have hope. You can help more people by focusing on throwing out the crackers. Now, one story to finish things up. So in 1990, Jerry Sternin was working for Save the Children. He was sent to Vietnam, and he was ordered with the task to cure malnutrition in the kids. And the original thought process on how to cure malnutrition is to get fresh drinking water and get out of poverty. Now, he called that TBU, true but useless. Now, this story is from Chip and Dan's Heath, How to Make Change When Change is Hard. And he called that TBU, true but useless. Of course, it'd be nice to cure poverty, and it'd be nice to get clean drinking water. But he only had 6 months before he had to get in and get out. And it goes, I need to figure out another way. So what he did is he looked for what's called bright spots. And he said, I want to find somebody who's living in poverty and doesn't have good drinking water, but is still growing, still getting nourished. And he took notes. What are they doing? And he found a pattern that they were putting shrimp in the rice and having sweet potato greens. Now, theorized that a lot of the other families weren't doing shrimp in the rice because it's more of an adult food, but that was probably a good source of protein. And the sweet potato greens was also just considered, kids don't eat that. But it was probably a good source of vitamins. So the idea has to come within. So instead of them lecturing people, they had moms in the community go out and teach the other moms. And now, here's a quote from the book. He refused to make a formal announcement. Knowledge does not change behavior, he said. We've all encountered crazy shrinks and obese doctors and divorce marriage counselors. He knew that telling the mothers about nutrition wouldn't change their behavior. They'd have to practice it. So, now, if you're telling them, you're saying they need specific instructions, they need the rider, and they need the elephant. So the specific instructions are put shrimp in the rice and have sweet potato greens. And the emotion is hope. So they have highly specific instructions. We have to tell them exactly what to do. And if you talk to a parent anywhere and you go, do you want your kid to be better nourished? You want them to be healthier? And you make it simple, you give them hope, and they say, I can do that. That's the hope. Make it as simple as possible. And you find those bright spots. I can do that. And that's what's great. Oh, make it less work, not more. That moves the elephant. They found, Emory Public University did a study 6 months later, 65% of the kids were better nourished. And even children who hadn't been born before were better nourished. And over the years, 14 villages, 225 villages, 2.2 million kids were better nourished because Jerry Stern looked at the bright spots. And I would ask, what's true but useless in dentistry? Now, these are things that need to be studied, and they're 100% true, and we keep wanting to make breakthroughs with these. SDF was a huge breakthrough in the last 10 years. But genetics, true but useless. And how is that going to help my kid today? How is it going to help the patient in the chair right in front of you? Virus of bacteria, again, other than the modalities we have, what can the parent do? What can we do right now? And what are the bright spots? I want to find kids in poverty, kids on Medicaid, that are horrible brushers, don't floss, and are still cavity free. And I want to say, what are they doing? What is that bright spot? We're not going to cure poverty, but what can we do to keep it simple and give them hope? And I would say the answer is eat bread, not crackers. Eat ice cream instead of suckers. Eat chocolate instead of sticky candies. Make it simple. And instead of shunning away from the bright spots and going, oh my gosh, maybe we should actually be looking at them so we can help more kids. So thanks for listening. Hit me up on Facebook if you find it helpful. Love a shout out or subscribe, like, and hopefully you find this helpful. We can get the snack guide for free. Thanks.